Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast. Before we get started today, Maria, do you have any questions for James?
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Region Free Gamers podcast, you ghouls, maniacs, and psychopaths. My name is Ozzy Garcia, and I will be your host for this fine episode. And guess what? October is back again, as it does every year, wouldn't you know? And that means we have a very special Halloween-themed episode for you. So, last year we focused on the first 3 Resident Evil games. So this year we thought it would be great to discuss that other renowned horror series, and that is Silent Hill. And in particular, Silent Hill 2. Remember though, make sure to smother with a pillow that subscribe button if you like what you're hearing. If you have not done so already, make sure to leave us a review. I know we always nag you all about this every episode, but this is really the best way for a little podcast to grow. So with that out of the way, let me introduce who we have for this very special episode. In the frigid wilderness, we have the man that is slowly descending into darkness around this time of year. Our very own Canadian Paul Ramallo.
You know, it's true. It won't be long. I'm going to have like 6 hours of daylight, probably in like 2 months.
It's a good thing that you don't need daylight in order to record a podcast.
It's great. It's like the main reason I do it, actually.
Or, you know, you might be a little bit screwed though, because you can't play Boktai, as much anymore.
That's true.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I have to move now.
Screw Kojima. Yeah. Right in my hometown of New York, where the streets are haunted by the ghosts of the past, is our second Puerto Rican, Mr. Polybits himself, Anthony Oriaga.
Yes.
And with this signature...
That's the most Silent Hill sound effect. Sorry, Ozzy. That's the most Silent Hill sound effect I could ever heard.
Anthony just came back from a trip to Silent Hill.
So I'm a little messed up right now.
He's going to be telling us all about it.
I'm a little messed up.
Yep, and we are very pleased to bring back a very special guest that you just heard. He has the red beard of doom, he's the Teutonic Prince of Darkness, and a terrific drummer to boot. If you were ever to receive bad news, you would want it to come from this guy. And so with that, we invite our lovely German friend of the podcast, Dennis Strillinger, aka Strilly Vanilli. What's up, Dennis? How have you been?
Guten Tag, schön, dass ich hier sein darf. Hi guys. I thought I'd introduce myself with a German saying.
That is fantastic, because we are fluent in gaming, and so we accept all languages.
And we are number 1 in Germany.
Number 1 in Germany.
Which is all thanks to you, Anthony.
Listen, I do what I can.
All thanks to you. All thanks to you and your jokes.
All thanks to the New Yorker Puerto Rican, not to the German guy. Like what?
No one likes a German guy in Germany.
Boo.
He's very appreciated in Australia, though.
Hey, Dennis, so you were telling me before, and then you got kind of cut off before we actually started recording, but how much of Silent Hill 2 did you manage to play last night?
I made my way up to the first encounter with Angela.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. So that's like 10 minutes?
Yeah.
That's a little snarky.
That's not even 10 minutes. That's like 5.
It depends. And there I can maybe start off with the first anecdote, because the moment when the game came out, I bought it right away on release date, and I played it with my best buddy from school, like after school, and it was daylight outside after school. We popped it in and we were super excited and hyped, and we started playing it. And that first descent that James Sunderland is taking down
down the path, the mountain path. Yes.
Right, exactly, that mountain path, the foggy mountain path with the eerie sound effects in the back,
and sound effects.
Noises. That part was already so scary for us that it took us like 10 minutes only to walk down that path.
Funny.
Because we stopped like every other minute or something, because we heard something in the back and we thought like, oh my god, now something's coming. So it can take up to, let's say, 15 minutes.
Well, depends on how terrified you are.
True. But I have completed the game multiple times, so I'm prepared.
So yeah, that's the caveat. So just as a heads up, I've beaten the game. Dennis has beaten it multiple times. Paul and Anthony have not, but they've played through significant chunks of it.
I completed it.
Dude.
Oh, you completed it?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, terrific.
I can't believe you're taking credit away from him like
Right?
that.
Like, hold on.
No.
That's Paul, not me.
So we forced Anthony, a Clockwork Orange style, to play through this before the podcast. So that's the only way that he was able to complete it. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're just going to be focusing on Silent Hill 2. So that means that the first Silent Hill will only be discussed in an introductory manner. We will not really go in depth into it, but really don't fear, because we will very likely record an episode dedicated solely to Silent Hill 1 and 3. Those are really kind of a duology. But for now, it is just Silent Hill 2, and that's a game that's been hailed by some as one of the most important games of all times, and for many, it is their favorite entry in the defunct Silent Hill franchise. But we want to make sure we let you know one very important caveat, and again, alert, listen to this. If you do not want Silent Hill 2 spoiled, then stop listening right now. There will be no spoiler restrictions on these episodes, so everything goes. And if you have not been able to play Silent Hill 2 in the last 18 years and want to be surprised, then we strongly recommend that you go play it and then come back and listen to this episode. So again, spoiler alert. Don't kill us if you say, oh, you spoiled it for me. There will be spoilers. So if you do not fear the spoilers, then we're just going to proceed. So first of all, let's just give a brief summary of what Silent Hill is. It's a survival horror franchise developed and published by Konami, and they released games from 1999 to 2012. They were mostly developed by an internal team at Konami that went by the name Team Silent. So, Team Silent really wasn't a dedicated kind of development team. They were just kind of a scattered group of developers that coalesced within Konami into, what eventually would become Team Silent. Before this, they worked on games like Kensei Sacred Fist, which is a Konami fighting game that no one remembers, Crypt Killer, International Track and Field. Some others worked on like Sexy Parodias, Vandal Hearts, Gorman series. None of those you could associate with Silent Hill, but there really wasn't a style, and it was just kind of like this team of mismatched toys. They all came together to create the first Silent Hill, and the first one was really Konami's answer to Resident Evil. At this point in time, the first Resident Evil was released in 1996, and the first Silent Hill was actually started development around 97. So around that time, Konami set their team to work on it, and they wanted something that could appeal to Western audiences. And so the Team Silent itself, there are a few key members. Keishiro Toyama, he was the one that directed the first game, but he would leave Konami right after the first one, and then he would work on the Project Siren game, so that's Siren 1 and 2. Dennis, I'm pretty sure you played those. Have you?
I own all of them, and I have only played the PS3 remake, so to say, of the first one. Is it Blood Siren?
Yeah, Blood Curse. Siren Blood Curse,
Siren
I
Blood
think.
Curse, exactly. I played that one, but I haven't.
Yeah, that
played
one came out only digitally. In the West, it came out only digitally. In the PAL territory, so it's actually a physical release.
I was gonna say I have a physical of that. Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah. But in the West, it was a digital exclusive. And then Toyama actually went and developed the Gravity Rush games. So really, amazing. As far away as you could get from Silent Hill, and those are really amazing games. But together with Toyama, a few others left after the first Silent Hill. So Naoko Sato, who did the Monster motion and story demo, he left, and also Isao Takahashi, who was a background designer, he also left. But there were a few that stayed. Masahiro Ito, who was a creature designer, Takayoshi Sato, who was the cutscene director, and Akira Yamaoka, who was a sound designer and composer. So all these people stayed in the Team Silent confines, and they went on to develop Silent Hill 2. But the first Silent Hill was released on January 31, 1991. And I want to ask you guys, so Dennis, what made the original Silent Hill stand out for you, either back in the day or when you were able to experience it? How did you view it compared to Resident Evil, since I know you like both of those franchises?
That as a good question. The thing is, Resident Evil and Silent Hill are entirely different games. They, of course, both are set in the horror genre, and back in the day, horror games weren't that common as they are today. So Silent Hill, when you played Resident Evil first, and then you heard about Silent Hill or read about it in a magazine and thought, oh yeah, that's the new horror game coming out and I want to play it and it's going to be awesome, then you're going to start the game and you're immediately going to recognize the differences in atmosphere, in setting, in pace. Especially the pacing is totally different in Silent Hill. It's way slower. It eases you into a very, very creepy atmosphere. And Resident Evil just has the classic B or C horror movie scenario, at least the first one. And then it grew in cinematic and in atmosphere and so on. But if you only compare the first entries of those series, then Silent Hill is like, this is weird. It's like slower and I don't really know what's going on. So the main character, Perry Mason? I don't know.
No, you got it. You got it the first time.
I know. I was just always wondering, why did they name him Harry Mason? It sounds so much like that dude from the stories.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so Harry Mason is on vacation with his daughter Cheryl, and they have an accident because Harry Mason in the night, in the dark depth of night, he sees a girl on the street and he tries to avoid hitting her, and then causes an accident himself. And when he wakes up, his daughter is gone. Everything is foggy and almost snowy or like ash in the air, weird atmosphere. And he walks around Silent Hill, meets Sybil Bennett, the police cop, the female police cop, and she tells him like, things are weird at the moment and it's dangerous. So let's check out where your daughter is. And
so slight understatement, but yeah.
Two things, that is. Let me just correct. I said 1991 in release. It was actually 1999.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry. I should have said something myself.
Sorry about that.
Very right. Yes.
And second, let me just mention, if Google Maps tells you to take the shortcut through Silent Hill, fuck Google Maps. Just take the longer route.
I think Harry didn't. I think he actually wanted to go to Silent Hill. I'm not sure.
I don't know if he was going or not, but in any case, it didn't end well for him or his daughter.
Yeah, and to quickly come back and to also quickly end this bit, how I received it. Friends of mine got it. I didn't, because I didn't have a PlayStation back then. And we met up at a friend's house. Same thing as I already said with Silent Hill 2. We met after school. It was daylight outside. We closed the curtains, made it a little bit horror, atmospheric, cozy. We were like, I don't know, what did you say, 1999? So that means I was 16, 15. And it was pure horror. We at some point we all stopped playing because we said, okay, no, we just can't go on. This is too much.
Yeah.
And I went home and was like, okay, I'm never going to play this game again. But, of course I have. And when Silent Hill 2 came out, I was way more into horror, and, it was God sent. So, because it just made everything better that the first game promised. Although they are kind of different games. But the first time I played it, it was super terrifying, but so fascinating at the same time, because up to that point, only Resident Evil had me feel this kind of fear in a game. So that was pretty much something.
What I really liked about it was just that the variety. It was just such a total contrast to Resident Evil. You know, like I really appreciated that. But scary as hell. Like, and I was really impressed how I don't know how Konami managed to license out the fog machine from the Nintendo 64 as the engine, which was really impressive. I didn't think Nintendo was doing that, but they made it work a lot better. And it was just the mood, man. It wasn't like, that's the thing about Silent Hill. There was a lot of like, I think me and my friends would kind of like not really seriously debate about it, but just kind of talk about it. And it was always like, oh, Resident Evil's got all this action, but I was always more like, yeah, but there's something really creepy about Silent Hill, you know?
Yeah.
The just the music, the tone. It's never meant to be what Resident Evil was, and I think that's what made it to me so endearing. You know.
That's actually, there is this one tale, not a tale, but like a fun fact that Team Silent were told by Konami to create something that resembles Resident Evil. They wanted their own Resident Evil, and they did. And then the guys from Konami said, "What the fuck are you doing there?" Sorry, I said fuck.
And what did you give us?
Yeah, exactly. They were surprised because it was so different and so disturbing. And it was not only like horror, you know, monsters and stuff, but it was disturbing, and the camera angles and everything. And then at some point, Konami just said, "Yeah, you know what? Go play around with that shit. I don't know. I don't
want
care.
this out of my
we
room.
don't care. Just." Yeah, exactly. Do the thing. We release it, but we don't care about it. And they released it, and it became a success. And Konami was like, "Oh, okay, let's pick that up.
Let's
again,
make another
then."
one.
Yeah, exactly. That was like
I think
how they did it.
you know, the story goes, you know, the rumors are that the people that worked on Team Silent, the ones that eventually became Team Silent, they were all kind of people that didn't really fit in with any other teams, and Konami didn't know where to put them. And that's the reason why they were given like this task. It's like, hey, okay, you guys go make something, you know, in the vein of Resident Evil. I don't think Konami was expecting anything out of them because, again, they just didn't know what to do with them. And I think it really caught Konami by surprise. And for example, Takayoshi Sato, who eventually ended up being one of the most influential team members in Team Silent, at least for the first 2 games, you know, before this, he was working on like Sexy Parodius, or he was just given like the grunt work. Like he was like designing the fonts and stuff like that. And he was just, during this time where there was a jump to 3D, a lot of the people at Konami, they were just knowledgeable about 2D development, but they didn't really know anything about 3D. So Sato had to teach them. And so he started getting pissed off that he was basically teaching these guys, but he wasn't getting any credit for it. And so the way that the Japanese work is that, you know, the underlings don't get any credit. If there's a more senior guy, he's the one that's going to get credit. And so what eventually ended up happening was that he created this amazing CG cutscene for Silent Hill, and he showed it to the people at Konami, and he said, "Look, this is what I can do, and I'm not going to teach anyone how to do it unless I be given complete reign to do this." And Konami was like, "Well, fuck you too then. I mean, you do it. And if you're going to do it, then you're not going to get any help." And so Sato was like, "Well, fine, I'll do it. You know, I'll do that." And so he was forced to like work overtime and work at night just so that he could do all the cutscenes. So all the cutscenes in the first Silent Hill, they were all done by Sato. He did all of it. And, you know, when the E3 demo came out, that was Sato's work that he was doing. And so, but with that said, I want to go to you, Paul. Did you experience this back in the day? I know you were working at EB Games around the time, right?
Yeah, which was a nightmare in and of itself. But the game, yeah, I played it pretty much right when it came out. I was pretty hyped for it. Like I'd heard, you know, the rumors and all the previews and so on. And man, let me tell you, like, it's the scariest shit. Like it was the scariest piece of media I had ever experienced. Like books, movies, whatever. And it wasn't even by a little bit. It's like, it's by a fucking country mile. Like that this was scarier than everything else. And unlike Dennis and Anthony, I didn't play it with friends. I played it at night in my parents' basement. And like, man, I'll never forget, like, obviously it's scary as shit, right? But then you get to the part in the game where Harry's in the shopping mall. I might have told you guys about this before, I don't know. But you get to the part in the shopping mall, and there's a wall of TV screens piled up on top of each other.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's snow on the TV screens, like they just suddenly turn on. And then there's these like occult symbols that start flashing on the TVs. And I was raised in a religious household. Not that I'm particularly religious now, but like, you know, stuff like movies like The Omen really freak me out. Like the little kid with the 666 tattoo. Like I'm getting like chills right now thinking about that shit. And when those like occult symbols appeared on the TV, I was like, I'm out. I'm out. It was 2 a.m. and I reached forward and I hit the power button on the PlayStation and I walked up the stairs from the basement, and I swear to God, man, Like, this is the first time it had happened since I was like 6 years old. I had that extra spring in my step as I went up the stairs because something might have been behind me. And I was fucking 20, man. Like,
Yeah. It's terrifying. I think it's one of those games that, you know, again, just making the comparison to Resident Evil, I think it's been said many times over, but Resident Evil is a series that is built, you know, with jump scares in mind. It's scary, but in a different sense. Silent Hill is always about what you don't see. It's always about what may be looming rather than what actually is there. And the way that they achieve this is through several ways. One is through sound, which is extremely important. Sound design is probably the aspect that makes Silent Hill the scariest.
Absolutely.
And the second one is camera angles. Camera angles in Silent Hill play a huge part. They may like nauseate you a little bit, but at the end of the day, they play with your head because it kind of reflects the twisted psychology of the characters that you're dealing with. So for example, right as soon as you start the game, it just kind of throws you into a very deep well of terror. You start walking around the town looking for Cheryl, and you go down a back alley, and the back alley just starts getting darker, and it starts turning red, and it starts turning into this hellish landscape until you encounter this body, this flayed body hanging on a cage. And then you have the enemy start going at you, and you're just kind of thrown into it, and the sound is just blasting away with clangs and metallic noises. And at that point, you're just thinking, all right, I'm either going to traumatize myself permanently or I stop playing this for now. And it's a game that can achieve that. And for me, when I was just 10 when this came out, I mean, I didn't want to touch this game. I was fascinated by it. But I'd be lying to you if I told you that I was able to play through it. I wasn't. You know, I had a friend that was much braver than I was, and he actually was the one that would tell me what would happen later on and stuff. And I actually got to his house once, and he was just finishing up the fight with Alessa. And it was kind of the end boss, and I got to see the end around that time, but that's basically my extent of experience with it at the time, because I just did not want to have to go through that trauma. You know, Silent Hill 2, I actually got a lot farther into, but the first one, I was just like, nope, I'm not doing this. I think when I first seriously tried to play it, you know, the moment that I got to the school and I saw that freaking ghost baby, I was just like, fuck this.
God.
I was like, fuck this. I'm not doing this. I'm out. I'm out.
Dude, why is the baby so much creepier than everything else?
That's why. Babies are creepy.
Yeah. Babies are totally creepy.
Well-known fact.
Well-known fact that babies are bad.
My one ain't.
Well, except for Johan. Johan is awesome.
He's so cute. But actually, I think next week, Blasphemous is going to be released. It's a 2D pixel, 16-bit pixelated Dark Souls kind of Metroidvania. And it has a really religiously and heretically themed atmosphere and setting. And in the trailer, there's this one enemy. It's a huge baby with a blindfold. And yeah, it goes on. It's been held up by hands out of the background. You can't see the creature, but it has to be even bigger than that baby. So it's been held up by that, I don't know what, 2 hands, this baby. And if it gets you, the character, the baby just starts pulling your limbs off.
Oh, God.
Because it has a blindfold on it, and it looks like it wants to play.
Yeah.
You know,
clearly,
just pulling on things. Every baby pulls on, and you know, if you give him something in their hands, but he just pulls off your arms and legs, and that scene is so creepy. It makes the trailer so
I'm so
horrifying.
glad you shared this, Dennis. I'm so glad you shared, because like I rely on my friends a lot to tell me which games to buy. Yeah. Conversely, now I know which game not to buy.
That's the thing, though. Babies in real life,
You're
adorable.
welcome.
Babies in video games, no. When you see a baby in a video game,
always super.
That's not good.
Super creepy. That one
and the
baby
thing
toy
with-
in Toy Story. Oh my god.
The thing with the thing with the first Silent Hill is that, you know, at least in contrast to the later ones, it derives a lot of its horror from the occult. So it's more based on demonic imagery and just twisted satanic rituals, etc. So if, like Paul or like me, you were raised in a religious household, you know, seeing this game for the first time is nothing short of blasphemy. It's nothing short of, you know, making you think that you are playing the devil's work. So it's a game that plays with those conventions of religious traditions. So I certainly think that, you know, for the religious minded, this is a game that you could have issues with.
Yep.
All right, so with that out of the way, let's take a quick break and we can go into Silent Hill 2 proper. So we'll be back and we'll be talking about the psychological horrors of the second Silent Hill. Alright everyone, we're back for more horror, and psychological horror this time. So Silent Hill 2 started development around 1999. So the first Silent Hill was released in January of 1999, and it was a financial success, thankfully. And so Konami wanted a sequel. But also, funnily enough, the developers at Team Silent also wanted a sequel because there were some aspects of the first one that they didn't quite feel happy with. They had some difficulties during development, so they wanted to really see their vision come to fruition. As I said, Keishiro Toyama, who was the original director, he left. And funnily enough, he said that he left because he felt like Konami gave him the directorship way too soon in his career, which is something strange to say. And he felt that he dragged the team down because they were more talented than him, and he was not able to really harness their talent as well as he could have. And so he left to Sony Computer Entertainment in order to really learn the craft of a director from the ground up.
Oh my god!
I
I'm
would
just
say
shaking
that
my head, dude.
I would say he did well for himself, but you know, he's really hard on himself because I think he did pretty good for himself.
Dude, it's such a Japanese thing. Remember when we did the Mega Man episode and the composer for Mega Man 2, whose name unfortunately I don't remember at the moment, but he left to go work at Konami because he felt that the sound designers at Konami were like top of the food chain and he wanted to learn from them. And I'm like, dude, you composed Mega Man 2. Yeah. You are the lion. You are the lion. You're the top of the food chain. What are you doing? People should be coming to work with you. And yeah, I don't get it, man. I think that maybe it's a Japanese thing, or maybe it's just like a low self-esteem thing that is shared by everybody the world over. Man, it's crazy.
It's weird, but I think that he did pretty well for himself. But he wasn't, part of the sequel, and so really it was Masahiro Ito, Takayoshi Sato, and Akira Yamaoka who were really kind of the heads. I mean, they weren't the directors, but the thing with Japanese development is that you may have a title, but the title may not necessarily reflect what you do. And that's something that you don't see in Western developed games. If you're a director, you're a director. But in Japanese games, at the very least, you could have someone that's just like the art designer. And that person is not just doing the art. He's basically shaping the vision of the game itself. And so that was the case with these three individuals who really had a heavy say on the development of this game. So the game itself was released for the PS2 first in September 24, 2001. The game was actually developed. It was co-developed with the Xbox, but the Xbox port would not be released until December of 2001. And that one would actually be released with some extra features and a new scenario called Born from a Wish, in which you play as Maria, one of the main characters that we will talk about in the game. The reason why it came out first on the PS2 is because Konami didn't really know what the plans were for Microsoft and Nintendo and their next system and console. 2001 was a year that the Xbox and the GameCube came out, but the PS2 was already released in 2000. And also Konami was eager to develop more of a relationship in the next console with Sony. So that's why it released on the PS2. And to this day, I think it's a game that's associated with the PS2 rather than the Xbox. Do you agree, Dennis?
Yeah, as I have only gotten myself an Xbox like a couple years back, I'm not really attached to the system so much. And when the PS2 came out, I got it like 1 month or something after its release. I got it for Christmas, so I was super crazy and hyped about it. So for me, it's a game that's connected to the PS2 anyways.
And in terms of comparison, if you wanted to play these games, I will say I played it originally on the PS2, but then more recently I played it on the Xbox. And the two of them are very good versions, to be honest, but the PS2 is a superior version because it has a lot more of the original vision of the developers. So for example, the soundtrack is actually dynamic. It's not looped like it is on the Xbox. The fog, which is so critical to Silent Hill, it's actually more volumetric and better developed on the PS2. And there are just a few things that the PS2 edges out over the Xbox. So if you have a choice between the two, play the PS2 version. If you don't have a choice, then you'll do fine with the Xbox. I can tell you that I played through it and it was totally fine. If you're like Anthony, you played it on the HD collection, and that's probably the worst way you can play it.
Yeah, I did what I needed to do.
But Anthony, you can tell us whether you felt anything having not experienced it originally, whether you think that was a inferior way of playing it.
It's funny because, like I'm playing it on the HD collection, and the HD collection really, it didn't seem to change too much. It didn't seem like it remastered too much, to be honest.
Did you play it with the original voices?
Yeah, I did it with the original
voices?
Original, yeah.
Okay,
Nice.
good.
Yeah.
Good to hear. Because the HD collection re-recorded the voices with Troy Baker as James Sunderland and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn as Mary, which they're very good voice actors. Those are some of my favorite voice actors, but there's something to be said about the original voice cast and the feel of it that just could not be recaptured with new voices. So I would say if you have your choices, first play PS2 or else play Xbox, and last resort, play the HD collection.
My understanding with the HD collection is that the graininess and the kind of inability to see the details on the PS2 version, all that stuff is kind of removed, and it's like everything's a little bit more distinct. It's easier to see. The fog is a little bit less, and so because you can see more details, it actually makes it less scary. There's less of an unknown out there, which is very interesting. Like, you wouldn't really know that while you're doing a remaster, I would think, right? It's only after the remaster is done and it's sent out to everyone that the realization would probably hit the developer, like, oh, I see.
We messed something up, yeah.
Not necessarily something that's superior in this instance.
Because the lo-fi nature of Silent Hill is very important to its aesthetic and its scariness. The graininess is built in. And let me just mention that I will admit, and here I have my right hand up swearing in, I'm actually able to remove the grain filter on the Xbox, and I actually removed it because I needed to make it less scary.
How dare you?
And I needed to see more of what I was playing. And honestly, it's just I really did not want to strain my eyes. A big part of it was just that. So you could actually remove the grain filter on the Xbox. So if the grain filter does bother you, there is a way to remove it. In the HD collection, you just don't have a choice.
The only choice you have in HD collection are the voices. That's it.
Yeah. But let's get a little...
good though. Like, sorry, Ozzy. Like, we were already talking about the voices, but like, those original voices, like I tried to find out, like I was scouring the internet and I was trying to find out, does anybody know if the original voices were directed to be as kind of weird as they are, Or was it just like, you have one take and we're taking the best we can, and you know what I mean?
It feels like the latter.
No, I don't necessarily think so, Dennis, because I have seen videos and they do have the full setup, which is not something that you would see back in the day. They do have like the mocap suits and everything. I did not really see a lot of that until Uncharted and the PS3 generation, but this is back in 2000 and they had the full mocap suit and they were actually recording their lines as they were mocapping. So I think a lot of work went into the development. I think there are several elements to it. One is that this was a Japanese team directing Americans that also lived in Japan at the time, which is very strange. And so the talent that you're going to get is going to be a little bit different from the talent you're going to get in the United States. And second, you have some voice actors that are not necessarily professionals. So Guy Z, who is the guy that voices James Sunderland, he actually went into it, into the casting, because his daughter was trying out for the role of Laura. And so he took her there, and he wasn't gonna audition. And so when he gets there, they're like, hey, do you want to try out for this character? And he was like, sure. And like a week later, they call him and they're like, hey, you got the role. And he's like, what role? And it turns out that it was Silent Hill. He got the role of James Sunderland. Unfortunately, his daughter didn't.
Talk about stealing her thunder.
Yo, I'm pretty sure his daughter, they never had a good relationship after that. That was it.
No. That's impossible.
That must have made for a very awkward conversation. So, hey, honey,
listen,
about that thing we
about your career path, I'm taking it now.
You may want to take up being an attorney.
But I think you answered the question then, Ozzy, because like there's not that I'm not giving the Japanese credit here, but like I don't see how the Japanese could direct the voice actors to deliver the lines the way they did, because to me, and I mentioned this in chat, for those of you who have seen Mulholland Drive by David Lynch, like that's what the voices sound like to me. Mulholland Drive, the actors are directed to speak in a way where everything just kind of feels wrong.
They feel like bad actors. Like it feels like they're just acting poorly, but it's meant to deliberately throw you off.
Yeah. Okay.
And the thing is, let me just mention, Paul, I don't necessarily think that it's just the Japanese's fault, because Jeremy Blostein, who was the translator for Metal Gear Solid, worked for Konami, and he was also the translator on the first and second Silent Hill. He was considered part of Team Silent at the time, and he had a very heavy role in the casting of the game and the directing of the game. So I do think that they had a Western hand kind of steering the ship a little bit.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's weird. I can't give credit one way or the other, but for whatever it's worth, the voice acting ended up being very weird. It's a very weird voice, the performance, but one that strangely fits the game. And I think when you look at the HD re-release, that's something that they miss, because Troy Baker is good, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn is good, but the point of Silent Hill 2 is not to give a good performance. It's to throw you off psychologically, because at the end of the day, and here comes the first spoilers, this is all in their head. A lot of this is in their head. This is all someone's reality, someone's version of reality kind of playing out in the physical realm. And so it makes sense that it just doesn't sound right in some ways. And when you have someone delivering their lines in a very deliberate, confident manner, it just kind of misses the point, doesn't it? So, and let's just talk about a few of the influences, because you mentioned Mulholland Drive, and I think this game, more than the other games, really was influenced by David Lynch. You know, the first one kind of had the Twin Peaks vibe with the town and the characters, etc., but this game really took Twin Peaks to heart. Mulholland Drive was just being released around that time, so 2000, so I don't think that could serve too much as an inspiration. But Blue Velvet, for example, Blue Velvet was a huge inspiration on the game. And for example, the scene where James comes into apartment, in the Woodside apartment, and he sees Pyramid Head basically raping two monsters with legs, the leggy monster, and he goes into the closet. That's almost like a shot-for-shot remake of Blue Velvet, and the scene where the main protagonist kind of goes into the closet and he sees this disturbing scenes being played out. So Twin Peaks also an inspiration with the weird characters that you meet and that you sense are hiding something. Everyone you meet in Silent Hill feel like they're hiding something. So that was also a very strong inspiration. And so whereas the first game was very inspired by Stephen King and The Mist and Carrie and the works of Dean Koontz, this game took its inspiration more from, again, David Lynch, Jacob's Ladder, regarding its psychological effects and trauma. I don't know if you guys saw Jacob's Ladder, but it's a terrifying movie, an absolutely terrifying movie.
You know what's funny, Ozzy? You're the only other person that's ever mentioned this movie, and I remember seeing this as a kid, Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, it must have traumatized you.
I was like...
That explains everything, Anthony.
Thank you. Now you get me.
Now I know. But also a few other... directors, for example, like David Cronenberg. A lot of the monster designs, you could, for example, mention Francis Bacon as one of the inspirations for the monster designs, but the body horror of David Cronenberg was very big, in the look of Silent Hill. And also David Fincher, like the look of Seven, is very influential in the look of Silent Hill too. So do you guys agree with these inspirations? Do you guys think that they had a huge hand in the way that Silent Hill 2 ended up feeling and looking?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's not obvious when you're playing, but when you see it written on paper,
it's like you can totally see it.
I was gonna say the same thing. In retrospect, you totally see that, and when you really try to analyze this, and you pick your influences out of this game, then you totally have exactly those, especially the David Lynch themes and the looks maybe although the Cronenberg looks of its body horror elements that he usually incorporates into his movies are way more gory and very explicit. And I think the monster designs in Silent Hill 2 especially, not 1 or maybe later on, maybe also not anymore, but especially in Silent Hill 2, those monsters are specifically, in my opinion, designed to show their helplessness. And there is this one monster, he looks like his arms are tied around his body.
Like he's in a straitjacket.
Exactly. And the leggy monster also, it's got legs up and down. So what can it really do apart from kick you a lot, right?
And the thing with it, Dennis, is that everything in this game is symbolic.
Yes.
Like this game drips symbolism.
Yes.
And so, again, spoilers, the straitjacket could be seen as James going mad and his frustration at being unable to act with respect to his wife's illness. So I guess it's a good time to mention the story. So the story is James Sunderland gets a letter from his wife Mary, who has been dead for 3 years, and the letter tells him to meet him at their special place, which is Silent Hill. And so he goes to Silent Hill because he really doesn't have anything to live for. And there he meets a strange cast of characters. And it includes a woman named Maria who looks very much like Mary, his dead wife, but is much different in character. And again, going back to the monsters like you mentioned, James's wife Mary went through an illness for 3 years or for a long time, and so she was bedridden, and so she had a terminal illness. They could not really do anything about her illness, so she just kind of slowly withered away, and James was just completely unable to act. He was impotent, and a lot of the things that you see in Silent Hill reflect that helplessness and that frustration at being unable to act. And there's an argument to be made, and we can argue about it later, as to whether James went mad after Mary's death, whether he was actually in a sanatorium or asylum or whatever you want to call it, mental institution. But yeah, all the monsters reflect some sort of psychological trauma. And I think because of that, it kind of built its very own identity. So even though we have talked about all these influences, at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like it's derivative. It doesn't feel like Silent Hill is just aping and copying other works and better masters. It ends up feeling very much like its own thing. And I think a big part of that is because of the medium that it is on. It is the way that the game merges gameplay with story. I don't think that there are many games that were able to achieve that at the time. We later would see games like BioShock doing that, but I think Silent Hill was a masterclass in making sure that the gameplay reflected the trauma of James Sunderland. Do you agree with that, Dennis?
Yes, absolutely. Especially the point that you mentioned, the symbolism, and that everything is symbolic in this game is exactly that. And that James has gone mad, I think it's very safe to say, because the more the story unfolds, and I mean, basically only at the very end of the game, you really get behind what everything is all about. But if you then either play it again or think hard about what happened, then you really see, oh yeah, this bit happened because he is mad, or this bit happened because he actually tried to suppress his experiences or whatever he has done himself, which is also a huge spoiler if we mention it right now or maybe later. But yeah, there are so many. So, for example, I wrote down a few notes. And,
please.
So
feel free to regale us with your stories.
Especially in regards to this, you know, has he gone mad or not? And is it all happening in his head? Is he lying in a straitjacket in a mental asylum and imagining everything? This could be a very, very, it's a very highly probable case that this happens, because so many characters in the game say things that they couldn't basically really know unless they were already inside of James' head or a figment of his imagination. So, for example, Angela says, the girl that James meets, it's the first person he meets actually in the game. He goes to Silent Hill, reads the letter, and the letter says, go to Silent Hill, meet Mary, meet, you know, and then he goes down that path into town, and he ends up at a cemetery, and there he meets Angela, and she's really confused, and she seems really lost. She's looking for her mother, and he talks to her, and over the course of the game, he meets her a couple times, and every time she feels so out of her own mind, basically.
Yeah, like she's stuck in her mind. Like there's something that doesn't allow her to interact with the real world. She's just concerned with something else. There's, you know, the first time that you meet her, James says, I seem to have gotten lost. And she just like stops for a second and she says, lost?
Yeah.
And it's just a weird delivery that you say, what is wrong with this woman? I don't know if you felt that way, Anthony.
Yeah, so it's like, so as I'm playing it, right, I'm trying not to read any of the notes or anything, right? I'm playing the game and I'm just kind of like, this is so crazy. Like, this is such a mind fuck, this game.
Yeah.
And it's like, as I'm playing the game, I'm appreciating the fact that they even released this game, because as we're talking about it, just the fact that we're talking about it like it's actual written literature that could be interpreted in so many different ways, and symbolism and everything. As I'm playing it, I'm just kind of like, I'm really kind of paying attention to every little thing, you know?
Yeah, it feels like you have to dissect everything. You have to deconstruct every element of the game. And it would be a good time to mention that one of the greatest inspirations for this game was Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And in that novel, you have a guilt-ridden character that is slowly being torn apart and driven mad by his guilt. And so in that way, it's almost like a recreation of Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. And James is very much along those molds. There's something about James that doesn't feel right. And you do have an unreliable narrator in James. And,
That's
where you feel like everything that you see is not as it seems. You know, and when you first see it, you think, oh, this is that. And you see James's reaction and you say, oh, he's actually shocked. But then when you think a little bit more about it, you wonder, is he really shocked? Is he actually lying?
Especially because what I was saying, like the other characters are basically, I think they are, you know, James Sunderland is like, he walks around not knowing anything, wanting to meet his wife again, his dead wife. Of course, he knows it's impossible because she's dead, but he comes there anyway. But the characters he meets and what they say to him, actually, it's so crystal clear, basically, once you think about it, that they are his subconscious telling him things.
Yeah.
It's like they know that he, spoiler, killed his wife.
Yes.
It's like they all know. And, they're all kind of like gnawing away at him like, oh, you're not innocent. You try to tell yourself you're innocent, but you're not innocent, right?
Right. Like, it's almost like he's in this purgatory throughout this game. This game is purgatory to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because another theme, that was very much driven home by the developers is this idea of sex and death. The two pulling urges of sex and death that were popularized by Sigmund Freud. And so they call this the Eros and Thanatos, Eros being sex, Thanatos being death. And really, that's when you look at the game, that's what James is being driven by. One, he's driven by his sexual urges, and this is very much under the surface. You don't really see this until very later on, where you see how sexually repressed James really is. And the other element is how suicidal he is. He's really just going ahead because he doesn't have anything to live for. And so right at the beginning, Angela tells James, you don't want to go into town. It's dangerous. And he says, I don't really care. So he wants to die in a weird way. So I don't know if you got that, when you were playing, Paul, because I know that you didn't get to the end, but you saw just enough to kind of get a feel for that.
Yeah, for sure. You can tell at the beginning of the game, it's not quite obvious that he wants to die or that that's one of the urges, right? Because he has a letter, and at the beginning of the game, like, all this stuff isn't clear, right? And so I thought, oh, he must really love his wife. And so he's willing to go into this place of unspeakable horror in order to find her. But on the other hand, she's dead, right? So like, even that motivation doesn't quite add up. And as the story unfolds, you kind of start seeing those kind of motivations. But right at the beginning of the game, no, not immediately clear. What was immediately clear to me, though, was Maria, the character of Maria. As soon as it kind of became apparent that she was his wife, but not his wife, like far, more flirtatious and sexy, I'm like, oh, that's not good. Like, he's clearly kind of, to me anyway, seeing the wife that he wanted to see. Yeah. Because, and you find out later it's because she's in bed for 3 years and he's not getting laid. So there you go.
Well, not only she's in bed for 3 years, but they don't really tell you what illness she's suffering from, but they have hinted that it might be something like leprosy. So her actual physical look is deteriorating, and she mentions that she looks like a monster in one of the letters that you get, and she is very self-conscious about that. So the last thing this woman probably wants to do is have sex. So
because you don't know what's going to fall off in the middle of it.
So James, he's going through this illness and he's just sexually repressed. And so with Maria, you have this character that is wearing a very short skirt. She has a very, pronounced cleavage, and she's flirtatious, she's sexy, and she's always kind of like inviting him to, come over and basically have sex with him. And he's being driven by either he's gonna get laid or he's gonna die. Either of those two, and he doesn't care which one of the two.
That's actually interesting. I don't want to spoil the fun here, but I have never read this game in such a Freudian matter. I have never really connected the sexual suppression of his character, although it's of course apparent. And if we follow what I have been stating as a thesis, that all the characters are his subconscious speaking to him, then of course Maria is his subconscious maybe dream projection of a wife that he wants to have. And there
and
are
that he
so
didn't
many
have.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end you fight Maria. She's the end boss. And so, sorry, spoilers. And,
if we haven't already like destroyed, any semblance of spoiler alerts here.
Well,
right.
You know what, Dennis? It's like what you just mentioned, that boss fight, like at that point, Maria looks more like Mary.
Yeah, and
right?
she dresses up like Mary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
she has
more like
the
Mary at that
cardigan
point.
on and her haircut is everything. She's super Maria in that point. Yeah. And
right.
depending on how you played the game, there are, I think, 5 different endings and,
6 in total.
6 in total, but 4 main endings and 2 ridiculous
which we'll talk about later
We're
on.
going to talk about those later. Yeah. Super weird, super non-horror, and I don't know what writ them. But yeah, the main 4 endings depend on how you play the game, how you react in the game. It's not like today, decision making and hey, this decision is going to affect your ending and throwing this into your face. You really don't have a single clue what you have done during the game that could have affected the ending whatsoever. And then you have to look it up and it's like, what? Really, this thing changed my ending? And super, super subtle and interesting.
It's not like, for example, Mass Effect or the Telltale games where it's like, oh, that decision, he's gonna remember that.
Exactly.
So it's the only other games that I have seen do something like this is, for example, Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which really try to take this concept of the way that you play being a kind of psychological evaluation of who you are as a player.
Yeah,
so
and what you do,
If you play in a suicidal manner, you're going to get a suicidal ending. If you play in a very conservative, life-preserving manner, you're going to get the ending in which you want to actually live. If you get very close to Maria, then you're going to actually want to be with Maria. And so I don't think that there are many games. It's kind of like a black box. Like when I look at the game facts or the guides, they tell you, look, you can do all of this, but you're still not guaranteed to get the ending that you want.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's still very much up to the game's algorithms to make the decision, as to how you're playing and what ending you deserve. And I find that to be absolutely fascinating that to this day, we still haven't been able to completely figure it out.
Yeah. And depending on whatever you do, the Maria that you face as a boss in the end, she has different monologues or different things that she says to James in the end part of the sequence. Exactly. And there, for example, she says, I can be yours. I'll be here for you forever and I'll never yell at you or make you feel bad. That's what you wanted.
And then she yells at you.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. And she yells at him because...
I was going to say just like a real woman, but that's wrong. That's not right.
Have to cut that out. Dude,
we're going to cut that out. Edit that, please. I had to put it out there. I just had to say it. We don't have to keep it.
And so, it's a game that really plays with the way that you play. It plays you, which, in a way. But with that out of the way, let's just take a quick break and let's jump into more of the symbolic explanations and the real underlying rot that is lying at the deep, dark heart of Silent Hill 2. Alright guys, and we are back, and since we're already talking about the symbolism of the game, we might as well get into a few of the characters. So we've talked about James, and James, he's facing a lot of guilt, he's very depressed, but I want to ask you guys a question, and Anthony, I want to hear from you. Do you think, after playing the game, that James is a good person? Do you think that he could actually be redeemed after the end of Silent Hill? Do you find that his intents were good or not?
Nah, I think James is a very selfish dude, man. He's so messed up.
What makes you say that, though?
No, just, I mean, like, obviously this is after we find out what really happened,
that he smothers his wife with a pillow?
That little part.
Yeah.
But she was dying anyway, so, whatever. Like, did he really kill her? But, No, it just said, you just find out, like, even the discussion we're having, like, all his thoughts, like, he was being sexually deprived, and he's just a selfish dude. I mean, I think he's not like Darth Vader bad, but, still.
Yeah, but the fact also, he lies throughout the game. He lies to the player, he lies to the other characters, he lies to himself.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, he's so screwed up in the head, and this dude is just like you said, it's like, playing this, and even like as we were talking about it, it reminds me of in the Dark Knight, the Joker's origin story. You're never gonna get the right answer.
Yeah,
he's hiding so much,
and that's very David Lynchian again. If you never get the right answer.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because you're not supposed to get the right answer. It's really trying to explore this inner psyche that's the most interesting component of the storyline and the narrative itself. But you mentioned something, Anthony, that I think is interesting, because you said, well, she was going to die anyways. And you said it joking, but at the same time, I think that's very important, because this game touches upon the themes of euthanasia. It's like, Mary at points tells James that she just wants to die. Now, there's a question as to whether she really wants to die or not. But this game touches upon a subject that I think not only in games, but in any type of medium is not very discussed. And that is the psychological effect of those that are around people that are terminally ill. Are you a bad person for wishing that this person would die already? Because your life is essentially on hold, and you are basically just living and being sucked out of life. Of course, in my case, for example, I would not try. I hope that I never feel that way. I hope that I never feel man, you've really screwed up my life.
Yeah.
But with James, is there some semblance of sympathy for him? Because he was there by his wife, and until the last moment, he was a supporting husband in a way. But there are enough hints, and the hints come through Laura, who is the little girl, the 80-year-old girl that was, I guess a neighbor of Mary when she was in the hospital.
Yeah.
And she got very close to Mary. And Laura didn't like him, and Laura told, Mary, I don't like him. He doesn't treat you well, and he's never here. So there's enough in the game kind of telling you that James was actually kind of a shitty husband, maybe. Do you think?
Yeah,
Paul?
but I think it depends on how you play the game is kind of your answer. Like when you say, are we sympathetic with James, or do we like James, or do we not like James? The game does not set him up to be liked. It does set him up to be disliked a bit, but if you get the ending where he rides off into the sunset with Laura, that's a much more sympathetic version of James. And presumably, if you played the game such that you got that ending, then you are sympathetic with him. Because you can interpret it yeah, he killed his wife, but was it a mercy killing? We don't really know for sure. But if you reach the end of the game where he goes off with Maria, then it's oh, okay, maybe he just killed her because he needed to get laid again. Yeah,
and there are two endings. Yeah. There are two endings that kind of reflect that. He sits bedside with Mary, at the end and says, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. And she says, no, I told you that I wanted to die. He says, yes. But then he says, no, that's not true. I thought that I really hated you and resented you for a time. Yeah. So it's weird. There's never really a clear answer. And I do think that, you could redeem James just as by the ending where he lives with Laura. But I don't think that kind of covers up the fact that he may have been a shitty husband, during the illness. Do you think so, Dennis?
Yeah, I think the deal is, if you finish the game, you have this letter from Maria, the one that brings you to Silent Hill in the first place, right?
From Mary.
From Mary, yes. And this letter starts off in a way, you read it when you play the game, when you start the game, when you finish the game, you get the rest of the letter. And it's always the same. And in this letter, she kind of forgives him. And it's apologetic and understanding and very calm. And no matter how you play the game, I always thought the letter should change, but it doesn't. I was like, yeah, but he has been acting like a dick the whole game, right?
Yeah, but do you think that this was... But do you think this is James's interpretation of the letter, perhaps? That James wants to be forgiven, and so he's reading this into the letter?
I don't think so, because then then he would be really shallow. If no matter how
I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah. I mean, no matter how you play him, the letter is always the same. So for him, then in that case, it would be like, I don't know, I was a bad dude, but I interpret this very, nicely. I don't think that this is. I think that this is genuinely Maria talking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess let's talk about Maria, since Dennis keeps bringing her up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Inadvertently. I find the character of Maria to be fascinating. Because, let's just say, if you haven't seen a picture of her, she's basically, her face it's modeled after Cameron Diaz. So she looks very much like Cameron Diaz back in the early 2000s. If you've seen Charlie's Angels, she looked beautiful. So she's a beautiful woman. Her body is modeled on Christina Aguilera and one of her looks back in the early 2000s. So technically, at the time, as a 12-year-old, like, that was everything I wanted.
As a 12-year-old, I was like 20, and I was like, I'm in.
And that's also what James wanted. And she's a stripper in James's mind, because that's probably where James was going when Maria was sick. He was probably hitting up strip clubs and, kind of having covetous and desires for, urges for, the strippers, etc. And so she is born as a stripper, essentially. And she really is born out of, Silent Hill manifests her out of James's mind. And it begs the question, particularly if you played the sub-scenario Born from a Wish, Dennis, do you think Maria is a real person, or could she be one? Do you have a degree of sympathy for her because she's made to be everything James wants, and so she has no agency? I know it's a deep question. I threw a lot at it.
No, it's good. I mean, it's a deep game. So I think Maria is probably the one character out of the whole cast of the game that could most probably be a separate entity and not an entirely made up character from James' subconscious, because she does represent his suppressed, wishes and things that he never had and that he always wanted, especially during the time of his wife's illness. But she also not only throws things at him that really look like it's coming from his own mind. He kind of questions him in a different way.
Yeah. How do you feel about Maria, Paul?
Well, I don't really ascribe as much depth to her as the rest of you do. Now, perhaps that's because I haven't played the game as far, and so I didn't see it. But to my mind, for every character I've seen in the game, it's a character that was invented by James's psyche. So therefore, none of these can actually be three-dimensional characters. They all kind of they all orbit around James's sun, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, Maria reminds me, I don't know if you ever saw this movie called Solaris. And Solaris was a movie in which George Clooney was the protagonist, and he is an astronaut. He's a scientist, but he is taken on a mission to this planet called Solaris because the astronauts that are observing the planet are they've just completely gone silent. And so when he gets there, it turns out that the planet is manifesting the figures of their past. And so George Clooney's character, he starts encountering his dead wife as well. And so the dead wife that he encounters, the one that he actually sees in Solaris, is suicidal. So she keeps killing herself. But that's because that's how George Clooney's character remembers her. And I feel like this is the same case with Maria, where Maria was, if you play the Born from a Wish scenario, she just appears in Heaven's Night, which is the strip club. And she's just kind of like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know how I came to be. Do I want to live or not? And I feel like that's kind of what Mary's subconscious was probably thinking as she was sick. So I do think that there's an element of Mary that's kind of in there where she doesn't really know whether she wants to keep on living or not. And so I do think that there is a degree of agency to Maria. Of course, she has to be part of James's id because she keeps getting killed, first of all, and she keeps reappearing, and when she keeps reappearing, she is basically, the way that James thinks of her in a way. She's either very dependent on him or feisty. So it's always a very contradictory, character that you get with her. Do you think so, Dennis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say the same thing, that she keeps on dying in front of James, and he always reacts a certain way.
And he's helpless. He's unable to help her. And so this is a representation of his inability to help his wife.
Exactly.
Through his illness.
Yeah. And that's just in the end, it's just another evidence, so to say, that she's actually just his imagination, or not imagination, but his remembering, or him remembering his wife, and him remembering being helpless. And whatever he did, he couldn't really change anything. And that's exactly, she dies so many times, three times, I guess, in 2 times before his eyes, and 1 time, he says, I'll be with you in a second, because she's behind bars in the room. And then he comes to the room from another door, and then she's there dead. And it's devastating for him. But that must have been the way with him feeling helpless towards his wife.
Yeah. So let me touch upon 3 other characters, the other 3 characters, and what I'll do is I'll pick 1 character for each of you. So I first want to talk to Anthony. How do you feel about Eddie, Anthony?
Oh, Eddie? It's weird because, he's like this, right? He's like real self-loathing. He's really off about his weight, but then he gets real like psychotic the more you meet him, right? Like, he wants to like kill anybody that makes fun of him. And I don't know. I don't even know if Eddie was, I don't know if it was necessary in the game.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where he fit, but I just remember it was kind of like, okay, I like everyone else had a place, but then like toward the end of the game, I remember when the final time you see him, he's like, if anybody makes fun of me, this is Eddie speaking, if anybody makes fun of me again, I'm gonna shoot them. And then the first thing James goes, what are you, crazy? Like,
it's like, James, what the fuck?
James, what are you doing right now?
Awesome.
But I think he has a really important place in his mind, because he is James' bad conscience. Eddie says at some point, do you think it's, James in the end says, when they're in the slaughterhouse, James says to Eddie, do you think it's okay to kill people? You need help. And Eddie says, you and me are the same. We're not like other people. And then James kills Eddie. And, that Eddie says, you and me are the same, of course, is symbolic, but it's also just, he's stating the truth, right? Because he's a figment of his reality, of his mind. And, but in the end, I think, Eddie is James' bad conscience when it comes to the question, is it okay for me to kill my wife who wants to die anyway because she's super sick and she feels horrible, and, but can I do that? Can I perform the act of euthanasia on my wife? Is that morally
it's
okay?
Funny, Dennis.
There's another theory.
That's a great point you made, though, Dennis. I'm sorry, Ozzy.
No, go ahead.
No, that was a great point you just made, Dennis, because that's, and I just finished playing this game, so it's like the first time I played this game, but like, that's a great point. That conversation at the end is very telling.
Yeah.
But there's another theory to this, though. And that's that these are all, like Angela and Eddie, these are all characters that James may have met in the mental institution. Because Angela and Eddie both have very deep psychological issues. And this may be James's interpretation of those characters that he meets in the mental institution. Because Angela, let's just go to her. I think that she's a victim of sexual abuse, probably by her father.
Yes,
that's
very
actually
apparent.
what I think happened. And she's an adolescent in the game, so she's a teenager. And I think she feels very guilty about her body. Like, for example, the fact that she wears a turtleneck is very telling. It's almost like she wants to hide her body. And as as she gets older, I think that she's ashamed of the urges that her body kind of builds and creates in other people. So that's why she tells James, like, you just want to fuck me, basically, and I feel like she's very traumatized by the sexual abuse that she suffered at the hands of her father. So these are all characters that have, very deep psychological issues. The only one that doesn't is Laura, who is the little girl. She's 8, and she's kind of like perpetually stuck at 8, which is a very telling hint that she's not real. She's just someone that, James met, during Mary's convalescence. But Laura's very important, I think. And Paul, please chime in on this if you want, because I think she's a representation of the future that Mary wanted, which is that she wanted to have a child with James. And so the ending in which she leaves with Laura, it's kind of like the future that could have been and the future that Mary probably wanted for James. Do you agree with that?
That's pretty much how I saw it, yeah. I don't know if James necessarily wanted a kid, and I think that might have... Because they're very confrontational in the game.
Exactly.
It's very weird, and thus, maybe when they go off together, that's James being like, well, I killed my wife, but maybe I can do this for her. But I still killed her.
And if she messes with me, I'll kill her too.
No, I think he does try to prevent her. Like, she, in this one scene, she's in this one hotel room, and she lies there on the ground facing the mirror, and she has a huge kitchen knife in her hand and playing around with it. And he's like, "Oh my God, don't do anything stupid."
You mean Angela?
Yes.
Yeah,
Angela.
Oh,
yeah, she's
sorry,
suicidal as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I think that if we're going with your theory, Dennis, which is that these are all characters in James's mind, Angela is James's suicidal side. Because actually, when you take the knife, if you examine it, that actually is one of the things you have to do in order to get the suicidal ending.
Yes, that's true.
So
if you're interested in the knife, so to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the ending I got.
Oh,
yeah, I know. I couldn't not look at the knife. It's an object in a video game. Like, of course you're going to examine it. I mean, I want to kill myself, guys. Come on.
Exactly. So I think Laura is a very interesting character because she's one of the first ones that really calls James out on his shit. Like, he's like, you are an asshole, basically. And it kind of shows that maybe James really didn't want kids, and James kind of doesn't like kids. And she's the only one of the characters that doesn't see monsters. So she, like, goes freely throughout Silent Hill without encountering any danger. So I think that she's kind of the closest you get to Mary in terms of the other characters, because she was just so close to her.
Yeah.
And when he finally sees the video where he sees him smothering Mary, the first one you encounter is Laura. And, Laura asks, "Have you found Mary?" And James says, "Mary is not coming back. The truth is, I killed her." And Laura is the guilty side of James. Laura is the one that says, you killed her, I hate you, So that's kind of James's subconscious telling him that he's a terrible person. So again, I mean, all these characters, as you say, Dennis, they all kind of represent some part of James's subconscious. And I just think it's fascinating. I don't know if you feel that way, Anthony. I don't know if you feel like this is messing with your head right now.
Yo, this is tripping me out, man. This is totally tripping me out. Because, I mean, originally, like, even going back to when we were talking about the beginning of the game, that I walk into room 307 and I could have swore, I'm like, are these monsters having an orgy right now? Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about the psyche of all these people. It's trippy, man. And even like I just said, I was like, we didn't need Eddie, but then Dennis made that point about that conversation they had. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe he was needed. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it not only goes to the characters, but it also goes to the monsters, like Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head is kind of a punisher. He's an executioner, and Pyramid Head eventually ended up becoming like the face of the franchise.
Go figure. Yeah.
It's like, why the hell would he be the face of the franchise when he's just kind of a manifestation of James's desire to be punished? But hey, why
I mean,
not?
that's mismanagement of the franchise, which is probably a topic for another time.
That's a topic for another day, but Pyramid Head keeps chasing him because it's almost like he wants to be killed. How do you guys feel about Pyramid Head? Is he scary or not?
He's super scary. Oh my God, what a question is this?
I disagree. I disagree.
Really? What?
Yeah, dude. Like the first time I saw him, scary. The second time I saw him was the orgy, and still scary. But then the third time, I think, unless I'm mistaken, is the boss fight.
Yeah.
And the boss fight I found just completely declawed him.
Absolutely.
Because he was so slow and so lumbering and so honestly lame. And I'm like, wow, this is not really kind of what I expected from a boss.
Yeah, I share that sentiment with you, Paul. I've said it to you guys, but I don't think the boss fights in this game are very good, actually, because they all kind of follow the same pattern of a slow, clambering enemy that you can easily avoid and that you shoot a few bullets at and then you move to the other side. And that was, I think, exactly what happened with Pyramid Head, where I see him, I encounter him, and I'm like, oh, you're not really going to move that fast. You're not going to surprise me. And that, for me, was just a complete declawing, as you say, Paul. I do think that there are moments where he's absolutely terrifying. And I think these are the moments where he's chasing you down hallways. So there's a moment with Maria, the moment where you're in the hallway with Maria. Absolutely terrifying. Like the first time I saw that, I was like, fuck, and the second moment was in the labyrinth, where you're kind of like in the subterranean, like in water and stuff like that. And you're kind of like in this circular labyrinth, and he just kind of appears out of nowhere. He's just there, and you're like, oh, where's the exit? Where's the exit? So I do think that he still retains an element of scariness, but I think he's the least effective when you're actually battling him head on. Like, for example, you didn't get to this part, Paul, but at the end, you fight two pyramid heads that kill Maria. And I found this to be very anticlimactic, because the penultimate boss fight
is super lame,
and I found it to be very lame. But I do think Pyramid Head, it's a good design. Unfortunately, I think he's gotten overexposed. He's kind of like, Freddy or Jason, where you're kind of like, oh, he's a pop culture icon now. Pyramid Head is an icon.
And I have to be honest, the geometric, like, I didn't dislike math in school enough for Pyramid Head to really scare me. It's like that weird geometric thing. Like I just don't get it.
Yeah, but you know what is scary?
It was so sorry, Ozzy. But
go ahead, Dennis.
So the look of his head was so abstract. I couldn't really put my finger on the reason why they designed him this way. Earlier I said I know why they designed the straitjacket guys or the leggy creatures, but Pyramid Head was like, why is his head like this, or why does he have a helmet on like this, or whatever? And he carries around this huge fucking knife. He tears it,
which you can actually get later.
Yeah, and this is,
which shows you again that it's part of James's subconscious, because the fact that he's actually wielding Pyramid Head's knife is pretty significant. I mean, I never used it because it's too slow, but it's pretty symbolic.
I actually would have loved for the game to change an ending if you had killed the Pyramid Heads with their own weapon. But that
would have been interesting. Yeah. I don't know if it would have been possible, but it would have been interesting. Yeah. And another element here that it depends on whether it's scary or not, I found it to be scary, are the nurses. That's another enemy that's been very mismanaged in the franchise as a whole, because it's become so iconic. But the nurses are a representation of James's repressed sexual urges, because, of course, there were a bunch of nurses, while Mary was sick. And so the nurses are hypersexualized. And so you're looking at this game and you're like, should I be terrified or aroused? I don't know.
The answer is terrified, Ozzy.
Yeah, exactly.
Anthony,
I think
Anthony,
more specifically, more specifically, the answer is not aroused.
Oh man, I guess it was just me then.
It's time for your sponge bath, Ozzy.
my sponge bath. And the nurses are pretty terrifying. One thing about this game, though, and maybe we can talk a little bit now about the gameplay itself. The game is actually not that hard. It gives you a lot of ammunition, which is not common for survival horror games. And it's almost like the developers want you to finish the game. And so I found that if you just, kind of skipped by and ran past the enemies a lot of times, like, that kind of, as you said, Paul, declawed, the experience a little bit. Once you realize that you can do that, it's a little bit less scary. But I don't know if you guys feel that way. I found that getting past the enemies was really easy.
On the streets it was. Like in the apartments, not so much. Like in the apartments, I had to deal with that shit. But
yeah, you actually had to use the weapons.
Yeah, on the streets, it's like, hey, what up, straitjacket? And then you run by, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and one of the things about this game as well is that it doesn't have a user interface, which was not very common for the time. That was also the case for the first Silent Hill, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And it's not really missed, One of the things that always surprised me about this game is that James actually starts huffing and puffing after he has run for a little bit. That's something that I've always appreciated because it shows kind of the little touches of the game. And the other thing is, one of the hallmarks of the series is the use of a flashlight and the radio, which, tells you when an enemy is nearby. And I want to ask this to you, Anthony. How do you feel about the flashlight and the radio? Does this make for a scarier game?
Yeah, you know what? That's one of my favorite things about the game. It was like the subtle nature of things, So there's no HUD, but when you would go to the pause menu, you would see like depending on your health, it was like really staticky if you were getting hurt, and you just take a health bottle. But and when you're actually playing the game, just the flashlight, it was really early on, but I loved the part where you couldn't read anything in the hallway because there wasn't enough light,
and you're terrified.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my god, where am I supposed to go right now?
There's also another scene where the flashlight just turns off. And you've had this battery for a while and you forget about it. And then the flashlight just runs out of battery. And you can either, put the battery, remember that you have a battery and put it back in, or get by without a flashlight, essentially.
Because you're like you said, like you're picking up so much stuff throughout the game, So the battery thing was like, oh, I picked this up. Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah. But there's also another element to this game, and that's the mood that it creates. Mm-hmm. Silent Hill, the town itself, feels very lonely. And you could see this as a representation of James's loss and his sense of loneliness of being a widower. So I want to ask you, Dennis, what emotions did this game make you feel while playing it? Besides fear, of course.
What else could there be?
Ozzy was a little aroused, so
that's true.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah,
I sure ask these questions.
I sure wasn't. But, it's a valid question, right? Of course, you're scared at times, at many times, but the loneliness factor and especially the confusion that this game transports was always there. There was so many moments when I thought, what the hell is this supposed to mean? Or why did this character say this and that? And it was only after a couple playthroughs or even a few details I only realized now, preparing for this episode, dissecting the game meticulously and really getting into all the notes and things that you can read and find and the things that the other characters say, that I found out about so much depth of the story and the symbolism, that I've realized that this loneliness was actually the one thing that is the strongest emotion, especially because, as you said, the town is so lonely. Yeah, there are very few enemies, not so many enemies. And there are less enemies than in the first Silent Hill. And
absolutely,
they are actually easy to beat or just to avoid. So you don't have to be scared of the enemies, which is basically one of the main factors in any other horror game. But
and let me also ask you one thing, Dennis. Let me just interject real quick, and I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, go ahead.
Because I just thought of this. James has killed his wife. He's alone. He's a widower. The last thing he probably wants to do is interact with people. So it makes sense that the people that are around him are monsters, because he wants to avoid them. He wants to avoid being judged. He wants to avoid kind of exposing himself, and he wants to avoid social interaction. I mean, I think that's a valid reading, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, as I initially said, the monsters really represent his helplessness, and they're just a part of his mind too. And the monster design was so unique for the time, because usually the monsters were intimidating, huge. They had claws or whatever kind of force that they could use. But those enemies, they're not really scary at all, apart from their voices. And like, especially the straitjacket guy, he's really, you can beat him with a stick. He falls to the ground, you can kick him and he's dead. He's like the easiest enemy ever.
Except when you don't really kick him and he starts like crawling around like a freaking cockroach on the floor.
Yeah, then they're super creepy. And especially the sound, the noise that he's making then is,
Exactly.
But I think this character, he looks like the straitjacket that he's in also has a hood, and he can't speak because he's got no face, but he still looks like he's screaming with what his face is, or his head is tilting all the time.
Like his posture implies screaming.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, oh my God. And pain, actually. He looks like he's in pain.
He looks like he's in pain, yeah. I think one of the emotions, I think that, yes, there's fear, but I think the biggest emotion that I feel with this game is dread. Like, I don't know if I actually feel enjoyment when I play this game. I love it, but I don't know if I would call it enjoyment. I feel nervous.
Yeah,
I feel anxious when I play this game. Do you agree with that, Paul?
Well, yeah, it's the same reason. It's a similar reason, not the same, but it's a similar reason why people go on roller coasters, right? You're safe, but at the same time, like, there's a real fear, like there's a real kind of danger that you fool yourself into believing. And it doesn't really matter. Like, we're all wanting to, this is going to sound deeper than it is, but like, we're all wanting to feel something, regardless of what it is. So when you're playing a game like Silent Hill 2, you're experiencing this dread and fear that ordinarily, most of the time, you wouldn't experience in everyday life. It's not so much that it's a negative thing, it's more that it's just a thing, and it's intense. Yeah. And because of that, it's fun.
So with that nugget of information and wisdom, we're going to take a break. Alright guys, and we're back, and I think I would be slaughtered with a big knife by Dennis if I didn't talk about the music.
Hell yeah.
The music is, I would say, probably the most important part of this game, besides the narrative and the symbolism. Because with Silent Hill, the sound design is so critical to the experience that if you play these games with a muted volume, I think you would be missing about 50% of what the experience is like. And I think that's a credit to Akira Yamaoka, and Yamaoka really established himself through Silent Hill. He had done a number of other games at Konami, during his stint there, which went from like 1994 to 2010. He's now working at Grasshopper Manufacturer with Suda 51, and he's been doing games like Shadows of the Damned and Cinemora, etc. He's actually more on the actual technical sound part than the actual composing side. But with this game, the first game was very much almost like a Nine Inch Nails album. Like, it was very influenced by the industrial sounds of Nine Inch Nails, and it was a lot more clangering and metallic than the second game. The second game was more inspired by like the noise music genre. It still had an element of industrial, but it also had elements of classical music and trip hop. It's a lot more melodic. It's a lot more melodic than the first one. The first one had a few melodic tracks, but this one was a lot more melody and mood oriented. And it's actually one of the best soundtracks ever made. And it has one of the more fantastic songs ever made, Theme of Laura, which is the intro song. And it's Yamaoka's favorite. It's my favorite. And it's kind of an anthem for the series. Like, the main melody comes up once in a while in the later games. And it's just like a very melodic, melancholic, song. It's a song that I will never get tired of listening to. Do you think so, Dennis?
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything that you just said. Like, I never put on the Silent Hill 1 soundtrack.
I love it when people agree 100% with everything I say.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is no doubt about it. Akira Yamaoka is a genius when it comes to sound design and composing. But what he did here, this is the pinnacle of a career that anybody could ever reach, in my opinion.
It's his magnum opus. It really is his magnum opus.
It supports the game so much, and I actually can prove your statement that it would strip the game of 50% of its atmosphere if you muted the music, because when I got the game initially in 2001, I played through it, was horrified, wanted to play more endings, and I decided to tune down the music so I would be less scared. And yesterday evening, I checked my old save games on my PS2 memory card, and the first playthrough was 15 hours. The second playthrough was 7 hours, because it was 50% less scary and I was 50% quicker. I assure you, because there are so many scenes and moments when the music really had me at a halt and made me contemplate my next move twice, and it's insane. The music actually supports the visuals, the setting, everything in this game. It's incredible. And one small fun fact, just I want to state here. Akira Yamaoka did basically everything himself on the soundtrack. He recorded all the instruments himself. He was the mixing. He did the mixing and the mastering. He recorded it himself. He did all the instruments, the digital edits, and all the editing, everything. He did so much.
There's also awesome. Something in this game that I don't see in any other games, which is a brilliant, genius move by Yamaoka, which is that you have a lot of noise and terror in parts that are in which nothing is happening.
Yeah.
And I found that to be so terrifying, because I'm like, why is there so much terrifying noise if there's nothing going on? Like, for example, that apartment in the Woodside Apartments where there are a bunch of butterflies. As soon as you go in there, it's like a ton of noise and you don't see what's there because the camera angle is fixed. And you're like, I'm going to encounter something, but nothing ever really happens. And then there's silence in the moments where something really bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's like it's fucking with your head. And I find that to be such a touch of genius. But I want to ask you something, Dennis, and sorry to go back to you, but I know that you're very musically minded, so I want to get your thoughts. Do you prefer the melodic, soothing nature of the sounds of the sequel, or did you want Yamaoka to kind of retain more of the rough industrial sound of the first game?
No, it's perfect the way it is, because the melodic parts in the second soundtrack really emphasize the loneliness, the despair, and the dread of all the moments in this game. All the encounters with the characters are supported by some piece of music. And as you just said, the parts where it gets really rough and where there are enemies that are really dangerous or something, they are usually without music or only with this kind of industrial sound, atmospheric, body in the background. But the pure industrial feel of the first soundtrack, it would have been a little bit misplaced in the second one. It would have sounded boring because it wasn't that unique anymore. It was perfect and unique for the first game and so horrifying. But the first game was more grittier with all its satanic or occult themes.
It was the manifestations of a less twisted psyche of torture and abuse. Exactly. And so it made more sense that she would want to inflict pain on others. And so there's a lot, again, going with the symbolism, it's what's beautiful about this game is that there's always a subtext to everything. So Anthony, let me ask you, what do you feel about the soundtrack? Do you listen to it outside of the game? Because I do.
I didn't have enough time. But seriously, no, I think it's true though. Like you It's funny, Dennis, because like you said, it took you twice as long to play the game with the sound on, and I totally get that. Like, I think I mentioned this earlier, but it was just like that. The music, it's more about the mood and the sounds. And you guys mentioned that before too. Like there's just certain parts, like I think, after the first encounter with, what's this guy's name? Pyramid Head. I was going to say Triangle Face, and that's not right.
Polygonal Face.
Yeah, something. Yes. But like when James is going, they're looking for Laura, and there's this drum beat soundtrack kind of thing going on, and I was like, "Yo, this is good. This is amazing right now. It's so tense." And I'm just kind of like, but and I hear things, and you're hearing things, but like I didn't see anything.
Yeah. So the first time I listened to Theme of Laura was before the game was even released, because it played with the trailers that were released. And from that point on, I listened to the soundtrack on repeat even before I had finished the entire game. So I would say if you're on the fence about Silent Hill 2 and you may not want to play it, give the soundtrack a shot, because it's certainly a soundtrack that can be listened to independently of the game. Do you think so, Paul?
Yeah, and I mean, it depends on your tastes, right? Like that, it is subjective, to be fair, but it is brilliant for what it is. And also worth mentioning, the silent parts, when shit's about to go down, if you have music playing during that, I feel like it's going to dilute the effect of the radio. I think you need the silence to max out the effect of the radio, which, by the way, again, I know we talked about the radio, but man, that radio is one of the most brilliant gaming mechanics I've ever seen. It is so fantastic, because when you hear that radio, like you sit up straighter. It's like I feel like a dog that's being whistled.
Yeah, it's functional from a gameplay perspective, and it also achieves the intended effect of horror.
It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
So let's move on from the music. If you can take anything out of this, is go listen to it. It's absolutely fantastic. Give Yamaoka your offerings and praises, because he really deserves it for the soundtrack. Let's talk endings. Which endings did you guys get? I got the in-water ending. What about you, Dennis? What did you get the first time?
I think the in-water ending is the one that most people get the first time they play it.
Yeah.
And I believe it was the first one I got too.
Yeah, and it seems like, Anthony, you got that one as well.
Yeah, that's the same one I got, yep.
Yeah, so the in-water ending is the one where James approaches, he kills Maria, and then he kind of meets Mary, who is bedridden, and she's kind of like in the throes of her final hours of illness, and basically asks for forgiveness, and they kind of reconcile. Once she dies, he takes her, he carries her, puts her in the car, and then he throws himself into the lake with the car. So you get this ending if, for example, you don't heal yourself right away, if you're, if you like examine the knife, etc. So knowing how gamers usually play this actually makes sense, would be the ending that most people get, but I find it fascinating that you don't even know that this is happening while you're playing it. That you're going to get this ending because you're playing in a suicidal manner. So, Paul, what do you think about the endings? I know that you've seen the various endings. Which one do you kind of see as canon in your head?
There is none, I think, honestly.
I think In Water is the closest one. I think there are a lot of hints that In Water is probably the most canon one.
Yeah, but I don't know, the word canon is... I think the word canon doesn't necessarily respect what this game is trying to achieve. I think when you're playing it the first time, especially the first time, and yeah, most people get the in-water ending, and I think there's a reason for that goes beyond the game kind of examining the gamer, but I think that it really kind of depends on how you interpret James and how much sympathy you feel for him and so on. You know what I'm saying? And to say that one ending is now considered canon kind of
undermines
really
that
respect.
effect. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree with that, even though in my head I want the in-water ending to be canon because I just kind of need closure. That's what I hate about multiple endings. You know, we talked about this, Paul, in the past. It came up on the podcast. I have a really strong distaste for multiple endings, but I think this is multiple endings done right. Because,
it's very respectful of the gamer.
Because it's your own story. It's not that, hey, I made this choice where it was binary, and because of this, I was punished. I think this is the best way that you could do multiple endings. And it's interesting that to this day, there aren't almost any developers that have taken this lesson to heart and implemented into their games. You still kind of see the binary BioWare type of multiple choice approach to multiple endings, which is really kind of a shame.
I don't think publishers will allow it. I really don't. Like, I don't think that a developer could take this concept to Electronic Arts and say, we want to do this, and Electronic Arts would be like, yeah, we're on board.
I don't agree with that, Paul. I think it's more of like a question of talent. I really just don't think that people, you know, have been capable of really implementing this in a way that doesn't make them go insane.
Yes, and I also agree with you there. Like, I definitely agree. It's also talent. But if there was somebody good enough to achieve this again, I think it would get swatted down immediately.
Yeah.
I don't think publishers basically have enough respect for gamers, is what I'm saying. Like, I think Electronic Arts would be like, no, we need the gamer to read and select A or B. None of this
it's not going to test well with our audiences, essentially. Like, they're not going to be receptive to it. Yeah.
Somebody in a focus group is going to take their finger out of their nose and be like, I don't get it. And that's the end.
But there are a few other endings. There are a few other endings, and I'm, you know, we talked about the Leave ending already, but the Maria ending is very interesting because with the Maria ending, it's kind of like James doesn't learn any lessons, and he gets very close to Maria, and he's like, Maria will be the replacement for Mary that I need. But one of the interesting parts is that as they're leaving Silent Hill, Maria starts coughing, and James says, you'd better take care of that cough.
Or else.
Yeah. When I read that ending, I was like, oh, that is so amazing. That is such a subtle just ending to the, like, that's it. She's gone.
Like, if there was a bad ending, this would be it. Like, if you had to say this is the bad ending, that's the one. Because it's almost like James is, you know, gonna be stuck in a perpetual loop of he's gonna kill Maria once she gets sick, and then he's gonna go back to Silent Hill, and then he's gonna meet another Maria that kind of fits his mold. You know? And then there's another.
That's exactly.
There's another ending that you can't get in the first playthrough, and that's the Rebirth ending. And it's interesting because this ending is more connected with the first Silent Hill because it kind of plays into the occult aspects of Silent Hill, and it's kind of like James does certain things in the game that allow him to potentially perform a ritual that brings Mary back. And he's kind of going at the end into an island with Mary's corpse, you know, and with a few items and saying the old gods have not abandoned this place. Some say that you can even bring back someone from the dead. And so it's hinted that this is where it's going. And that's a very interesting ending. It's certainly not one that I would prefer, but you know, you could read it that way as well. So I don't know how you guys feel about that ending, Dennis.
I was always interested in the occult as a whole, you know, because it's like fairy tales gone or like horror fairy tales gone real, because there's always something to it, just as in voodoo or something like that, you know. And there's always some hint of possibility. Then maybe there's something about this, you know. And I think it does suit the themes, the dark topics of a Silent Hill. But in the end, I think I agree, the occult ending, so to say, or this reading would be the one that's least suitable to the story. But on the other hand, I think all the endings are very
interesting in their own way. Yeah.
Yes, they're interesting, and they are all vague enough for a lot of room for interpretation to every player. So I don't even I think with Silent Hill 2, it's more the journey is the whole thing that's more important than the ending itself, because the endings are like, yeah, okay, it has to have an ending, but they don't really resolve a lot for me. Yeah. So I always think that the way you get there is the way you take the most out of this game.
Yeah. So I guess that means that we're not going to be able to talk about the dog ending because we're running out of time. But needless to say, there's a dog ending and it's very fun. Go look at it.
Please look at it on YouTube. It's ridiculous.
Yes. It's better than
also,
the UFO
the other ending is...
The UFO ending is kind of ridiculous, but you know, I don't find it to be very interesting. But the dog ending is just amazing. So I guess let's just close it out with a question. I mean, and you can answer this however you want. What do you consider to be the legacy of Silent Hill 2? And do you think it deserves a remake, or should it just be left on its own? How about you, Anthony?
Legacy-wise, it's kind of bittersweet because I just don't think, and like you guys mentioned, this is so crazy that they even did this game, and it will never. I don't know if we'll ever see something like this by a major publisher. I don't think they'll take chances like this, and it's such a good thing to have, though. You know,
I just worry, Anthony, now that you mention it, I just worry with the themes that this is touching upon of euthanasia, of sexual abuse. Like, this game could face a very, very strong controversy if any other game tried to do what this game is doing now.
That's the problem. That's the thing.
Like sexual assault survivors, etc. You know, they could have some issues with this.
They're never touching that. Yeah, never.
Like, I think this game handled it delicately. You know, I don't think that it really ran afoul, but I could certainly see a publisher saying, ooh, you know, this is a big taboo.
Yeah, because the thing is, like you said, they handled it really respectfully. It wasn't like they made fun of it or they just, made light of it. But, no one's touching that kind of topic in a video game.
It's like
now.
Kind of going to EA and saying, it's like, how do you feel about necrophilia?
Sold.
And I guess, and what you said,
but then again, it's really, basically, it's just important to address these things and to treat them, accordingly and be respectful with it, because just as in movies and, movies or literature who deal with these kinds of topics that usually are tabooized. How do you say that?
Tabooed? Yeah, there's no contraption or anything. It's just
I do like tabooized a little better though.
Yeah, in Germany. Sorry for that. I Germanized this word.
Yeah.
So those topics that are usually not touched by anybody because they are too delicate,
right?
They need to be addressed, because only then, when they are addressed a lot and when they're treated with respect, only then they will receive a status that is not being looked at as too freaky or too unnormal, too abnormal, because you have to talk about it and you have to face that this is a reality.
Yep.
And the more you can convey this topic to someone who hasn't had has never been in touch with this, the more they can understand what it means, and the less they will judge people for it. That's why I think it would be important.
I think the discourse needs to be made, and I think that's the argument that you're making, Dennis, is that we need to talk about these issues. We need to talk about sexual abuse. We need to talk about euthanasia. We need to talk about how we feel about those things, about, survivor's guilt, about, what happens to the caretakers, the syndrome, the caretaker syndrome. I think these are themes that are not really explored in other mediums other than literature, maybe. And I think, as Anthony mentioned, it's a very bittersweet feeling that I get about Silent Hill 2, because when it came out, it gave me this profound hope for the future of gaming, because I thought, oh my God, they're able to do something that no other medium is able to do, because they can tell a story in a way that the agency of the player is just as critical to the narrative as the telling of the story itself. And you don't get that anywhere else. And unfortunately, we have just kind of gone back instead of going forward after Silent Hill 2. like everything nowadays is more of like beating you over the head with the themes and the subjects. Silent Hill 2 doesn't do any of that. We just spent 2 hours talking about the symbolism, but if you want, you could just play Silent Hill 2 and not even care about the symbolism, and it's just a cool story. And that's about it. And when Paul was mentioning, who else could take this on, I thought, well, could someone like Kojima, but even someone like Kojima, he would not be able to do it proper justice, even though he was directing PT, which, the Silent Hills, sequel that was supposed to be in development, because Kojima does not have subtlety. I mean, you could lavish many praises upon him, but, having subtlety is not one of them. And I think that we have really just regressed a lot since Silent Hill 2, and I keep waiting for other games to do something like this. I will be fair, there's one other game that has made me feel this way, and that's Soma by Frictional Games. I don't know if any of you guys played Soma.
I have.
No, I wanted to, though.
But Soma is very similar to Silent Hill 2 in its psychological, suspense and the questions that it deals with on a philosophical level about the nature of a person, etc., and who we are. And I think that's probably the only one that has gotten close to Silent Hill 2 in terms of the way it tackles its themes. But it's very bittersweet because I really haven't had that Silent Hill 2 feel since then. Do you think so, Paul?
Well, yeah, you've really nailed it. But I mean, you can, in your notes here, you mentioned Citizen Kane, Silent Hill kind of being like the Citizen Kane of video games. But think about it, like how many movies released since Citizen Kane have been up to that level as well, right? I think we might be expecting too much.
Like
perhaps.
Right now, do you think that it's going to get better in the future, or do you think that it's just that Silent Hill 2 was just that good and cannot be replicated?
It will be replicated. It won't be by a major publisher. I don't think a major publisher wants anything to do with this situation ever again. And that's fine, right? Like, we don't really need them for it anymore anyway. Once upon a time, we needed Konami for this kind of game. Now we don't. Now there's tons of independent developers who can create this experience again. So will we see it again? Yes. We'll see it again in the same way that after Citizen Kane, we had The Godfather and we had
Taxi Driver,
Vertigo, and so on, right? Like there will be other games that are kind of like high level art that can be interpreted multiple different ways. And
we had Shadow of the Colossus, so we can't forget that.
Exactly.
But
right?
that scratched a different
itch. It will
itch.
happen again.
Yeah.
But does Silent Hill 2 need to be remade or anything like that? Hell no. I'm not to take away from Silent Hill 2, but as a general, just kind of generally, I'm kind of tired of paying for the same game again. You know what I mean? Like, let's just leave Silent Hill 2 alone. You can play it on the PS2, you can play it on your PS3, you can even, I guess you could play the HD collection too. It's not that it's bad, it's still fucking Silent Hill 2, right? Like, you're still going to enjoy it a lot. So, just enjoy it, man. It's there.
Yeah. What about you, Dennis? Do you think it should be remade, or how do you feel about the legacy of Silent Hill 2?
I'm kind of with Paul on this one. It really shouldn't be touched at all. It would be like an Old Boy moment where they made a remake with a great, set of people who work on it and good cast and everything. But I refuse to watch that movie because the original is already so perfect. Why the hell ever destroy this or, work your way through this to try to make it better if it's impossible to make it better? And that's the same thing with Silent Hill 2. I don't think, for example, the Resident Evil 2 remake is incredible, right? I would have gone happily ever after if I had never played a Resident Evil 2 remake, because the original is fine with me. And I think Silent Hill 2 is it stands on its own regards. It's a masterpiece. It will never be met on very many levels because it has so many layers, and other games have done great story. Other games have done delicate topics. Other games have done similarly good sound design and music, but you can't really copy that. And I don't think it needs a remake. Legacy wise, for me, the series is dead. After, I'm really, it's dark.
Tell us how you really feel, then.
But sorry, it is that way. Team Silent stopped working as Team Silent, and that means Silent Hill died, because everything after Silent Hill 3 went down the drain. Silent Hill 4 was kind of good, but not really the real thing.
It wasn't really a Silent Hill game.
No, it wasn't.
It really wasn't. And the thing is, when you think of Silent Hill, it's kind of like wishing that the Beatles were still a thing. Like, you're not gonna get that again. You just have to appreciate what's already there. Because they were built by a team that coalesced at a particular point in time, that had a very particular vision, and they made it happen. So, unfortunately, even if we get a sequel, it's not gonna feel the same. It may be good in its own way, but it's certainly not gonna be Team Silent. It's certainly not gonna make you feel the same way that Silent Hill 2 made you feel. No. But there's another element to this, Dennis. I mean, I think with respect to the Resident Evil 2 remake, I think that remake actually, the original game actually benefited a lot from that remake. And I don't think that, and it was very well received because of the quality of life changes that it made. I think that if you try to do anything with Silent Hill 2, it would fail. You know, I think it would fail, and that kind of speaks to the two different games that you're dealing with here. It's
easier to remake a Resident Evil because it doesn't have this kind of depth that you would have to convey into a remake, which would be super difficult.
Yeah. So I tend to agree. Let's just leave Silent Hill 2 on its own. If you want to play it, you can buy a copy on the PS2, on the original Xbox. You could probably play it on PC, but that's not an ideal way of playing it. Try not to play it on the HD collection like Anthony did.
Oh my God.
Stop bashing him.
I tried to be here for you guys.
But yeah, that's a wrap for Silent Hill 2. So this was super fun. Dennis, thank you so freaking much for joining us all the way from Germany. We always love to have you on the podcast, and particularly when we're talking about one of our favorite games of all time. So where can we find you, Dennis?
Well, on Instagram, you can find me at StrillyVanilli. That's mainly where you can find me. I'm always there. And you always, I know, you and Arnie and Paul, of course, you always leave me some space to advertise myself, my band Map My Waves, and my other podcast. But it's a German podcast, so I don't know. But yeah, if you want to listen to some
number one in Germany, so English-speaking podcast in Germany.
Here.
So
this is good.
If you stumble upon my Instagram, there you find everything. You find the link to my Instagram, to the Instagram of my band Magma Waves, to my podcast Pixel und Plastik. It's German 80s and 90s podcast. I write for the German indie games magazine Welcome to Last Week. So you find all that on my Instagram, linked in my bio. So
with a very good friend Benja.
Yes. Very amazing person.
So that is it for us, and we are the Region Free Gamers podcast. You can find us on our website at regionfreegamers.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Region Free Gamers Podcast. You can find us on Twitter.
Where can we find Anthony?
Anthony, we can find at Polybits, right? _
Yes, sir. Polybits.
Yes,
that's it.
So make sure to visit him. He's awesome. Anthony is our beloved friend, and so thank you, everyone. And until next time, have a happy Halloween. And this has been an episode of the Region Free Gamers podcast. See ya.
Stay silent.
Cheers.
Stay silent. Nice. We're not editing that out. It's time for your sponge bath, Ozzy.